All right. Okay. I'm just gonna show the screen share of you, and hopefully I can maybe edit this little bit out, but if not, hopefully everybody doesn't mind. We get to see this lovely photo of Isabel Friend here, and we are going to be talking structured water, black holes, water fasting, deuterium depleted water, molecular hydrogen, healing waters, and much more. And I love the quote from Isabel that says, living water is the fountain of youth. And we definitely want to talk about that. So I'm going to stop that and I'm going to come into my big screen. There we go. Thank you so much for redoing this interview, Isabel. I am so grateful to you. Technology happens and it's Mercury retrograde and all this stuff. So it's still your time, and time is love. I remember someone saying that to me. The time you spend doing what you love or with the people you love is love. So thank you again. I really appreciate it. So we're going to just dive in and go deep into water. And I have lots and lots of questions for you. So I guess one of the things I want to know about you is like what really got you into this passion for water, and you know, do you have a little story where you felt that first real connection with water?
Mm. Well, thanks so much for having me on again. It's a pleasure to be here with you again and to get to explore these topics more in depth. When it comes to my own history with water, I think it all started back in 2009. And I was a nutritionist at the time living in New York City, and I was studying nutrigenomics, which is basically how different kinds of food affect our gene expression. And I fully believe that we as human beings, as bodies of water, have infinite potential. We're capable of so much more than we realize. And at the time, I thought that the doorway into that infinite potential would be through the food that we eat, because as they say, you are what you eat. And what I started realizing is actually the water we drink and the water we're made of has far more effect on our consciousness, on our mind, body, and spirit, even than the food that we eat. And so I started wild crafting and wild harvesting my water, just as I had been wild crafting and wild harvesting my food. Because when we eat domesticated food or drink domesticated water, it has a domesticating effect on our gene expression and our mentality and everything. So when I started doing that, I started just drinking pure wild water. The similar story to yours, actually, that it was really spring water that kind of just blew me wide open and made me kind of awaken to the incredible mystery and potential in water. And that's when I discovered the work of Victor Schauberger, who, if anyone is unfamiliar with him, he was considered the water wizard from the late 1800s, early 1900s, and just absolutely brilliant water savant. I think that if humanity were to implement even one of his discoveries, it would radically change everything. And so through his work and beginning that path of research and study, I started discovering that really water holds the keys to all of humanity's toughest questions, not only our biology and physiology, which is that was kind of my entry point into it, but also all of humanity's questions about economy and politics and sociology and spirituality and ecology and climate and agriculture and all of these kind of conundrums, or that human beings have just tangled so much because we've turned away from the wisdom of life, which is the patterning of water. And when we turn back to that, everything becomes simpler, and she holds so many solutions. So that's really what got me obsessed in a way. And then I've just been studying ever since then. So that's what, 13 years now, I think.
Wow, quite the story, actually, because I mean, you covered a lot of territory there. And I kind of actually want to talk to you a little bit about something around Victor Schauberger, because for me also, he was an inspiration. And he kind of talked so much about implosion and explosion, about how water, the kind of temperatures like water likes, and how trout move and can go upwards, upstream, and how that all works. But one of the things that I'm sure you know about that really got me about Schauberger was that he talked about this time when he was basically just watching a little stream.
Mhm.
Do you know this one?
Mhm.
And so he was kind of going in this, he was in a kind of slightly altered space. I think he felt like he was. And he felt that he called his consciousness free consciousness. And he felt that his free consciousness was taken through the waters and he actually fell unconscious. And when he came around, he was kind of explained that water had returned his free consciousness full of information about
Mhm.
what it liked and about what it is and how it kind of communicated to him and gave him all this extra information. And he would say something like that he used to be a searcher, and then he became like a researcher of his own free consciousness, sending it out on these expeditions with the water and coming back full of information. And he, in his later life, also started working on some pretty incredible anti-gravity stuff. And I suspect that some of that is from what water taught him in these communications as well. But he said that he also said that he felt that water was alive, was conscious, and so and he was a big deal, and we still talk about him today as such a genius. So that's no small thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you look back through the ages, water, you can see that people have been practicing so many different kinds of water communication. It's cross-cultural. You look at any indigenous lineage, and they have their own various ways of communicating with water. And, one of the things that Schauberger says is there are as many different kinds of water as there are different kinds of living beings on this planet, as there are different species. And I would venture to say that there are as many different ways that water communicates as there are people to receive that communication. I mean, you're a perfect example of that. You've come up with this way of communicating with water that is so accessible to everyone. And, in other cultures, they refer to it as hydromancy or water divination. And, so you could send your consciousness along a stream and let it be returned to you with the wisdom, where you could do what Nostradamus did and get a black scrying bowl and fill it with water, and Nostradamus got all of his predictions from water, or like
I didn't know
the
that.
oracle. Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
know astronomers. That's really interesting.
hmm And
Huh.
the oracle at Delphi too. So she received all of her um, channeled information, all of her psychic information, all the oracles at Delphi. There was a lineage of priestesses there, and they would breathe in the vapors of the Casotis spring, and by breathing in the vapors of the spring, the water would take them into this trance state where they would receive information. And there are different, I mean, there are just all different methods. In the Kogi tribe of Colombia, they'll drop beads in a gourd full of water, and depending on the color of the bead, that determines what the nature of the question is, and then they'll read the way that the bubbles come up from the water, and depending on the patterns of the bubbles, they get the answer to their question. And there are so many others in the Celtic tradition and just all around the world. And I think, water is intelligence, water is consciousness, water is life. She is a living being. She has personality. Each different body of water that you meet has its own personality. And so I think she is always trying to communicate. And I think she gets lonely when we ignore her as much as we do.
Sorry, I'm just going.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to have to call you back. Sorry. Sorry, I'm
No
just getting
worries.
a bunch of phone calls from a situation that's going on. So apologies to everybody. I can't just turn my phone off right now. Something happened last night that I need to be present for just in case. But I'm very present with you right now, Isabel. So I love that aspect of that, looking through the ages and how water really has been able to communicate with us all of this time. And also for us to be able to start communicating with the water inside of us. I think that's another really important piece. And I think when we're starting to talk about health and wellness, that's a really vital thing to think about, is like we are bodies of water. Do we really have a communication with the water within us as well as the water outside of our body? So I think that's, maybe I'd like to actually hear how you um, relate to that question and how you feel about the water inside of you, and if there's any tips you have for people to start feeling like they can touch into the water within them?
Oh, this is such a rich and juicy question. I love this. So I really believe that intuition itself is basically an effect of our structured internal biowaters. There are theories that say that abilities like ESP and the sixth sense are actually due to the highly structured cerebral spinal fluid in our brain and our spinal columns that can communicate instantaneously with our entire body. And so when you look at psychic phenomena, it's not an effect of neurons firing. That's why when you get a psychic impression or an intuition, it doesn't come in the form of a thought. It usually comes in the form of just kind of a general feeling or a general knowing, because it has more to do with the connections of water molecules than the connections of neurons firing together. And that kind of thing is actually even being put into use in laboratories, for example, where water is being used to predict earthquakes in advance and to predict sunspot and solar flare activity in advance. So water definitely has precognizant abilities, which makes sense if we start to go into some of the more quantum aspects of water a little later on. Then her ability to kind of see past time and space will make a little bit more sense. But when it comes to connecting with that in our biowaters, water's ability to conduct information is directly proportional to the strength of the hydrogen bonds. In other words, how molecularly coherent is the water? Is she forming complex sacred geometries that allow those molecules to snuggle up and actually talk to one another? And a lot of that has to do with your overall general health. The healthier we are, the more hydrated we are. Health and hydration are a 1-to-1 ratio. Um, but if people want to really cultivate that psychic ability more strongly, then what I would recommend for them in particular is to focus most especially on the health of your cerebral spinal fluid, as opposed to your other watersheds or your other hydrological systems. And for example, there was, I think it was Dr. Randolph Stone who said that the soul swims in cerebral spinal fluid. And one of my favorite CSF researchers named Dr. Mauro Zapatera, he is I think he got 2 different medical degrees from Harvard and another one from some other major prestigious institution. He's just got MDs out the wazoo, but he's devoted his entire career to studying how CSF actually conducts consciousness. It is the conductor of our soul, our life force energy, and our conscious awareness. And so there are some really interesting studies that I've been getting into lately about prism oil and the sacred secretion and a specific kind of cerebral spinal fluid that flows once a month. But in general, for the health of your cerebral spinal fluid, what I would say is to make sure that you are very, very well nourished with all 12 of the essential salts. So I've heard you speak about this before, that we're basically just water and salt, and when we're cremated, all that's left over is salt. And it's actually these 12 essential cell salts that are left over. And so for your cerebral spinal fluid to be at its highest level of conductivity, you need all 12 cell salts. And what's amazing about the CSF is because it's piezoelectric, we can actually affect its conductivity through certain yogic practices like breath holds and pulling the bandhas, if you're familiar with bandhas, where you tense and tighten certain areas of the body, and that actually puts piezoelectric pressure on the CSF. And when that happens, it actually generates light. It's literally emitting light all the time. I mean, the CSF is always emitting photonic radiation to some extent naturally anyways, and we can stimulate that even more so. And then, so your CSF actually goes from your brain to your root and then back up to your brain again twice a day. It's on a 12-hour cycle. And as it goes along, it's getting consistently patterned by your 7 nerve plexes and your 7 endocrine glands, which correspond basically in location and function to your 7 chakras. So this sacred water is picking up on the electrical signals of these 7 nerve plexes at your 7 chakras and the emotional signals of your hormones. It's like the electromagnetism. If you think of thoughts as being electricity and emotions as being magnetism, that electromagnetism charges the CSF, and then it goes up into the ventricles of your brain. The central ventricle of your brain is particularly interesting because it is what some people refer to in the Christian tradition as the throne room, or in the Hindu tradition as the cave of Brahman, or in other traditions it's been called the crystal cave. But basically it's a lake of water, and it's actually also a lake of light because it's emitting light all the time. And it has tides just like the ocean. In fact, your cerebral spinal fluid is only one molecule different from seawater. And in the front of it, constantly bathed by this water, is your pineal gland, and in the back of it, constantly bathed by this water, is your pituitary gland. And so when we're starting to cultivate more of this psychic awareness, I think the CSF holds a lot of keys to that practice for sure.
My goodness, that is mind-blowing. And I'm so grateful we got to redo this, because we didn't discuss this in the original live. So that's amazing. Um, so coming into, I mean, I just want to keep going in that direction, because I just find that just so mind-blowing. That I think that if we kind of bring it around to hydration, and obviously you've said it's so important to stay hydrated for all number of reasons. Now, even a tiny little bit of dehydration can kind of give you headaches, and small little things. I've seen a post you did where you just listed all the things that just being a bit dehydrated can do, let alone fully dehydrated. So maybe you could talk about what are the signs of mild dehydration, and what kind of water do you recommend to really start staying hydrated, not just in just by drinking any kind of water. Is there a special kind of water that you would recommend to drink if people are able to, that will really help hydrate them faster? Because I do think there is a difference between quality water and water, say, from filtered tap water, for example. So could you get into that as to what kind of waters would be great to really get us to that optimum hydration level that might start helping that spinal fluid start doing its like optimum light giving experience there?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think most people don't realize that they're dehydrated, but there's statistics to say that literally 100% of the population is dehydrated. The most conservative estimates say 70 to 75%, but the doctors who are actually studying this clinically with their patients are saying that they don't have a single patient who comes into their clinic, regardless of whether they feel well or feel ill when they enter, who does not have a low phase angle. And phase angle is basically a measurement of one of the ways that we measure hydration, and it's a measurement of electrical charge. So I don't want to go too off in the weeds here, but basically just to say that your level of electricity, your level of vitality, prana, mana, energy, chi, is the same measurement as your level of hydration. The higher your hydration, the higher you can conduct energy and prana and chi through your body. And so we measure that through phase angle. Pretty much everyone has a relatively low phase angle, like the general population bell curve is right around 7 for the average person, unless they're sick when it's lower. But ideal hydration would be right around 12. And so this is an issue that we all need to look at, because in our society, we don't actually recognize what is hydration and what is dehydration. We think, oh, well, if I'm not thirsty, then I must be hydrated. But actually, your body is a sophisticated system of thirst signals. That's one of something that Dr. Batman Gelage always said when he was alive, rest his soul, was that your body, as a body of water, it pretty much, if anything goes out of balance, it goes out of balance to signal you that there is some disruption in water metabolism. There's some kind of water metabolism disturbance, whether it's a shortage of water or whether it is water that is in its wrong isotopic composition, or water that has fallen away from its oceanic mineral profile, or water that has lost its structure, or water that is not flowing properly from one watershed to another within your body, not transitioning properly between the various watersheds within you. So those are really the 5 factors of dehydration. So dehydration has very, very little to do with the water that you drink. It has everything to do with the quality of the water that you're made of. which is why when we talk about what's the best way to hydrate, yes, the water you drink is important, but the reason why 100% of the population is dehydrated is not only because they're not drinking enough water, although that's also usually true, and it's not only because they're drinking poor quality water, but it's because our lifestyle in the modern world is constantly dehydrating us at every turn. So when I work with one-on-one clients, we look a little bit at their drinking water, but we actually mostly look at lifestyle factors that are constantly dehydrating people. But if we want to look at the drinking water part right now, because that's a factor that we can all immediately shift, I think of it as being there are three different kinds of water. There's the water that most people drink, which is actually actively dehydrating them. And I know that kind of seems like an oxymoron to say that water can dehydrate you, but it's a factor of, like, for example, reverse osmosis and distilled water and anything that is labeled as purified water. Those are what hydrologists refer to as an aggressive solvent. And so an aggressive solvent basically has had everything robbed from it. So that water is very, very hungry. She has had all of her minerals taken from her. Water needs nourishment just like we need nourishment. She gets nourished by minerals that dissolve into electrolytes. And when those are taken away, she tries to fill herself back up again. And she sometimes does that by actually leaching minerals from our own bodies when we drink her. So over time, drinking reverse osmosis and distilled water, or any kind of aggressive solvent, will actually deplete our own bodies of minerals, causing us to become dehydrated in the long term, leading to things like diuresis and heart disease, etc. So there's dehydrating water, also things like tap water that contain chlorine. Chlorine is massively dehydrating. Fluoride actually disrupts water semiconduction in the cells, which is massively dehydrating. So all of those waters. The second kind of water is water that will satisfy your thirst. And so this is like the baseline minimum that people should be doing. Water that will satisfy your thirst, at least bring you to a baseline level. And that would be something like a mineral water, a bottled spring water, so something that won't actively dehydrate you, but it has the electrolytes within it to be well nourished, and it might not be very vital, but it'll get the job done. And then the third kind of water is living water. So as opposed to water that just passively satisfies thirst, this is water that actively imparts life. And this is like fresh spring water just gathered right from the source, or water that has been taken through a process to mimic what nature does at a spring to bring water back into that vital, coherent living state. So when it comes to that, it's basically full spectrum coherent water. So the water molecules are coherently aligned together. They have a high magnetic charge. H2O is a dipolar molecule, so you want her to be magnetically aligned. And it's water that has a full spectrum profile of electromagnetic, like the full range of the electromagnetic spectrum of information contained within it. So to bring water back to life, if you're dealing with dehydrating water or water that satisfies thirst, then the process that I teach for bringing it back to life is filter, structure, balance, and energize. And these steps anybody can do at home. I have a course that teaches you how to do them, but I also have a shop that has a lot of different tools available for people to do it. And it can be anything from like simple at-home DIY, not very effective but very cheap methods, all the way through to you can get one thing, actually the only thing I've ever found that actually does all of those steps. It's called the Spring Aqua. I just discovered it late last year, actually. I was so excited because I'd been teaching these steps separately for years. Like, well, you need to get this tool to filter, and this tool to structure, and this tool to balance, and this tool to energize. And there's some overlap, like you can get some tools that do multiple things. And then I found the Spring Aqua. I was like, oh my God, you're kidding me. Somebody made it. So that would be my highest recommendation if someone can really make the investment. It's basically recreating the geology of spring water. So the inventors actually studied the geology of Lourdes, France, where I'm sure, probably most people on the call know too, Bernadette's Grotto has some of the most healing water in the entire world. It's highly structured and it has really high levels of dissolved atomic and molecular hydrogen in it. And so the spring aqua is not a machine. It doesn't use electricity. It just has the same 13 to 17 layers of geology that is present at Lourdes, and it suffuses with a lot of molecular hydrogen. But again, there are other ways that you can do these steps. The spring aqua is about 4,200. I think it's so worth the investment to have like medicinal quality water. But again, you can structure in so many different ways. You can balance in so many different ways, and there's just a lot of alchemy that you can play with. Um, I'm sure you're familiar with MJ Pangman. She has a way of saying that, bringing water back to life is like a dance. Giving the water structure sets the stage for the dance, but then the music and the choreography, it's really an art, and you get to design it yourself and play with it and just have fun with it.
I so love that you brought her up as well. I love her work, and the
Mm-hmm.
words that she uses are like poetry. So
Mm-hmm.
you've just shared so much valuable information there. And I think that you kind of you touched on molecular hydrogen. And so there
Mm-hmm.
have been some words kind of floating around for some people, like deuterium depleted water and molecular hydrogen. But you also talked about how the spring aqua doesn't use electricity, and you made a point of that. So I kind of would love to introduce why you said that in relation to ionizing machines, I'm assuming, so that we can talk. Lots of people ask me, what have you heard of Kangen water? I mean, I've been studying water for so long. Yes, I have, and I have also my own thoughts on that. But I would love to hear, because I actually share. You did this wonderful post video on Instagram where you were directly talking about Kangen water. And I mean, I highly recommend anybody go and follow Jen on Instagram and go through and find that particular post. And I might actually even send the link with these videos, because it was just so in depth. You went through all the reasons and the comparisons between the spring aqua and the Kangen machine. And so my understanding of ionizing machines, particularly Kangen, because that's what I've used in my tests. And I've also tried it, when I had that experience with water. That was because I had tried lots of different alkaline waters. My doctor had suggested, if you go back and you hear my whole story, he'd suggested a natural alkaline water, but a Kangen representative was like, no, this will cure you. This will be amazing. You've got to try it.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried it for 2 weeks, but I mainly just had a headache, and I didn't find or feel that nourishment that I was really craving and that my body intuitively knew I needed. So my healing experience, as everyone knows, was from spring water, this beautiful, from very deep underwater aquifer. And the unique thing about it was that in that particular deep pocket, it was filled with quartz crystal. So, these things would have been a huge factor. So if you wouldn't mind touching on that topic, and also talking about deuterium depleted water. What is it? Can we get it? Is it good for us? Is it not? And what is molecular hydrogen? Can we get it separate to water? Like what's the deal there?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
So, so as you said, I've done multiple videos about Kangen. Even before I discovered Spring Aqua and did the comparison between them, I also have two full 20-minute videos just on all the reasons why I don't recommend Kangen. So people can go find that if they want to really geek out on the science behind why. But just to say, and to keep it kind of simple for people, what we do to water, we do to ourselves. So please don't do anything to your water that you wouldn't want done to your own body water. If you wouldn't want to sit down in an electric chair, then don't electrocute your water. And it does free the hydrogen, which I'll talk about in a second. But it does so through a process called electrolysis. And electrolysis basically splits the OH from the H, right? So it splits them apart to free the H, to free the hydrogen. And in doing so, it destroys the molecular structure. So it destroys the coherence of the water. When we're talking about water structure, it's all about the relationships that are formed between the hydrogen atoms. And I really think of hydrogen as being like the spirit of water. The more I study hydrogen, in fact, the more I see parallels, because I'm also really fascinated between water theology and water in indigenous spiritual traditions and all of that. And there's so many parallels between what we're scientifically discovering about protium hydrogen specifically and the Holy Spirit, what has been referred to by various names in various cultures, but ultimately the Holy Spirit. Um, and so, yes, you can free the spirit from something by electrocuting it, but there are better ways to do it. And so I don't want to get too deep into Kangen because I don't want to just, slam them, for lack of a better word. But suffice it to say, there are much better ways to improve your water. I mean, Kangen isn't even a filter, so you're missing a lot of the steps there in filter, structure, balance, and energize. And the last thing I'll say about it, so it doesn't filter, it doesn't structure, it doesn't balance. In other words, it doesn't remineralize, and it doesn't the way that it energizes water. So it does give water a very high ORP, which is oxidative reductive potential, and it's basically a measurement of the water's electrical capacity and its antioxidant capacity. However, it's not as important to have a really high voltage in your water. What's more important is to have a broad spectrum of the electromagnetic field available in your water. So Kangen and these other ionizers, they use a process that just puts like straight AC regular electrical current into the water, strong currents. But the way that nature energizes water was by exposing water to weak electromagnetic fields. So instead of a strong current, it's a weak field. And that kind of gently matures the water over time in a more balanced way. For example, in nature, water might be energized by geomagnetic rock formations or by the Schumann resonance of the earth and by starlight and moonlight and sunlight that she's exposed to throughout the day, and by the sounds of bird songs and the sounds of wind rustling in the leaves of the trees. She's taking in all of this information, and information is energy, so that's all energizing her in a very comprehensive way. And so one tool that I really, really love for energizing your water, for enhancing its overall maturity, the best thing that I found for that is actually the analemma. I know you're a fan of these too, because the water inside the wand is actually matured using a broad spectrum of natural influences. So they don't use any electricity in maturing the mother water inside of the wand either, but they allow the water to mature over the course of an entire year. So just, water will respond differently in the winter than it will respond in the summer, and so it gets the full cycle of seasons. It gets all of the moon cycles, and they mature two waters separately. One that's a more masculine, young, radiative water, and one that's a more feminine, yin, receptive water, and then they alchemically merge them together. So when it comes to getting the full spectrum, I recommend that. Spring Aqua also gives a much more natural spectrum as well, because it's using geomagnetism. So when we talk about hydrogen, I love this topic. It is so rich, and I've been studying it for years, and I still learn something new just about every single day. So to keep it simple for people, basically, there are three different kinds of hydrogen. There's tritium, which is very rare, so we're not going to talk about that. But the two most common are deuterium and protium. And the only difference between them is that deuterium has an extra neutron, so it's heavier and it's bigger, right? Whereas protium just has one proton and one electron, so it's very light. And as the Nobel Prize winner Albert Szent-Györgyi said, hydrogen is the fuel of life. And he was specifically talking about protium hydrogen as the fuel of life. It's what makes everything vital and vibrant. It's how your body actually converts water and even food and everything into hydroelectric energy for use in your body. Is through a process called ATP synthase, where your cells make ATP, which we consider to be the macromolecule of energy. But what Dr. Gilbert Ling found is that actually there's no more energy fundamentally in ATP than there is in anything else in the body. The way that ATP actually functions is by acting like a kind of heat source that creates more structure in the intracellular fluid. And then it's that structure of the intracellular fluid that allows it to conduct more energy and to conduct more voltage. So how do your cells create ATP that structure your intracellular fluid? Through the process of converting hydrogen. So the more hydrogen your body has, the more it can create structured water and energy within yourself. So you have these basically, they're like these little nano motors. You can think of them as almost like wind turbines on your cells. And the wind that powers them is protium hydrogen. And the faster they spin, the more energy you make. But when you get deuterium hydrogen that tries to come in there instead, it's like trying to put thick, gluggy, viscous oil into your car engine instead of regular gas. It's just too heavy. It's not going to work properly. It's going to slow them down and gunk them up. Or it's like trying to put a softball through one of those tennis ball machines. Like it's just not going to fit, right? And so it's really important to make sure that we have a lot of protium hydrogen on board. But over time, water and food and the environment in general has become higher and higher in deuterium hydrogen. And they have drawn direct correlations between the amount of deuterium hydrogen in people's body water and their susceptibility to disease. So you see a 1-to-1 ratio with things like, cancer, emphysema, AIDS, diabetes, all of these things. In fact, deuterium depleted water, which is also called light water because it's only made of light hydrogen rather than heavy hydrogen, has actually been used as a cancer medication in Eastern Europe. And there have been numerous human studies and trials for all kinds of diseases. It's just one of the most panacea things on the planet. So deuterium depleted water is incredible for that. So there are kind of two things that we're talking about here. Deuterium depleted water is water that is low in deuterium, whereas hydrogen rich water is water that has been suffused with extra molecular hydrogen. So it will have the same amount of deuterium as the original water, as the source water, but it will just have extra protium in it. And deuterium depleted water is not something that we can make at home. It takes a very complex process in the laboratory. Technically, you can make it, but it's really hard. It's not very effective, and it's kind of not worth it. It's better to just buy deuterium depleted water, which again, you can find at Water's Lifestyle Shop. But you absolutely can make hydrogen-rich water at home. And there are several ways that you can do that. Of course, as I mentioned, the spring aqua suffuses with molecular hydrogen. You can also get H2 tabs or little tablets that you drop in your water. They're made of magnesium and they dissolve, and you can see the molecular hydrogen bubbles coming up in there. And then you can also use electrolysis, which is why everyone's using these Kangen machines. However, if you choose to go the route of using electrolysis, make sure to get something that will do electrolysis in the source water, but then funnel the molecular hydrogen into a second container of water that has not gone through electrolysis. So it'll just suffuse the second container of water with molecular hydrogen without electrocuting it. So it's not my favorite method, but you can get a lot more parts per million. So you can get up to around 7 or 8 parts per million of molecular hydrogen with that. So if you really want a very therapeutic hydrogen water, with a really high ratio, then that would be the way to go. But we're seeing over and over again at all of the most sacred and healing springs all around the world, like Lourdes, France, and Madonna, India, and Tlacote, Mexico, and all of these different places, really high levels of hydrogen. And what I find really interesting is that in almost all of those places, those are the springs where people are citing saints as well, where they've been citing saints and holy figures and having miracle healings. I mean, pilgrims venture from all over the world in every state of health and lack thereof to come to these springs and be healed. So there's something truly profound happening with hydrogen.
I also heard that hydrogen is it is in the energy of levity, and oxygen
Hmm.
is in the energy of gravity. And
Hmm.
hydrogen is feminine and oxygen is masculine. And there is this beautiful balance, for the fact that we have even got water on Earth at all because of the way these all work together. So yeah, hydrogen is a really big deal. You can also, I had someone that gave me a little um, molecular hydrogen machine that you can breathe instead of drink.
Hmm.
And and so that was kind of an interesting experience for me as well. So, you know, it's there's quite a lot of studies about molecular
Hmm.
hydrogen as well. There's a whole big, do you know what the website is called? I'm sure you
The
on
Molecular Hydrogen Institute. Hmm. Yeah,
one.
they've got
Nice.
tons of studies.
They
Yeah,
do.
Tyler LeBaron is an incredible researcher who's put together a lot of things on that. I definitely recommend that site. And also, I have the inhalation machines on waterislife.shop as well. If you search for the Lord's Hydrofix, that's actually the only electrolysis machine that I actually recommend, because the cathodes are made really, really well. It's just pristinely engineered, and so you know that it's absolutely definitely creating protium hydrogen and not deuterium hydrogen. And yeah, I think one of the reasons why, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that that's really helpful, that people actually
Hmm.
have somewhere they can go as well. Like we can talk about all these healing things, but one of the wonderful things about having you on is you're kind of a one-stop shop for people too, because it's hard to know where do I go, who do I trust, you know, in a world out there that's kind of got so much going on. And just to know, I think for people to be able to see how passionate you are, how well researched you are, this isn't coming from someone who's just trying to sell stuff. This is coming from someone who genuinely wants the best for your health and has wants the best for the water, I think, as well, which is like a really important piece. Um,
I think it's the most important piece. I think that everything that we do has to come from the relationship first and foremost. It has to come from decolonizing our idea of seeing water as an inanimate object and starting to really cultivate that communion and recognizing as soon as you drink water, she becomes your blood within 5 minutes. So treat water the way that you want to be treated. You know, water has all of the same fundamental needs that we have. You know, she needs hygiene, you know, which we call filtration. She needs nourishment, just like we need to eat, and we call that, you know, mineralization. She needs to breathe, just like we need to breathe, and we call that aeration. You know, she needs to move, just like we need to move. We need exercise, and we call that vortexing and flow forms. And she needs quality relationships. You know, she can't be isolated, and we call that structure. We call that molecular bonding. All these different kinds of molecular bonds that come up. She needs, you know, um, education and energy and stimulation and entertainment, and we call that maturing the water or giving it, you know, electromagnetic frequency, electromagnetic stimulation, or, you know, creating infoceutical water or something like that. She needs, just like we need to maintain a very specific kind of body temperature, water has very different properties at very different temperatures as well. You know, she maintains her structure the very best at 4 degrees Celsius. She maintains That's what most high mountain springs come up at. That's where she's the happiest. She also will maintain her body temperature the best at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, which is our body temperature. So even in nature, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, water loves to just chill out right there and not move very much in the temperature spectrum once she's there. And then you get to some feats I mean, she's enormously versatile, of course, in her temperature capacity, but at some temperatures, she's just downright miraculous. You know, I don't think most people realize that water is actually the only element that comes from, or that creates all of the other elements, can take the form of all of the other elements, and contains all of the other elements. So I know we're kind of getting into the weeds here, but I find it really interesting because she gives birth to the fire elements, which of course comes from the sun, and the sun is actually born in the Orion Cloud Complex, which is a giant star nursery that contains enough water to fill the Earth's oceans 10 million times. And so water plays this key role in birthing stars. Every star that you see has come from water, has been birthed in the star nursery from water somehow, and also contains water as well. So the sun actually contains so much superionic and amorphous ice within the dark umbra or the sunspots. And when you see an ancient star die, you see it give off tons of water back into the universe again. So water creates fire. Water also takes the form of fire. People don't realize that water can actually burn at thousands of degrees. We call it a flazer or a fluid laser. And it's basically a flame, but it's just made of fire. Sorry, it's just made of water. It's a flame made of water. And it can burn through solid concrete. It can burn through steel. It's incredibly hot. And yet, if you were to put your hand right next to this flazer, it wouldn't burn your hand at all, even though it's thousands of degrees. It's an implosive heat, so it's only hot on the inside, but gives off no radiative heat the way that lasers and fire-based flames do. And that's incredible because that technology, laser technology, can actually, we call it plasma water, it's the plasma phase of water, can actually, I think it has the potential to restore the earth in so many ways because it can return anything back to the state of water. It can return pollution back to water, no matter, it can return like awful nuclear waste back to pure water. Laser technology and plasma water has the capacity to heal and regenerate so much. So it gives birth to water, it can become, or it gives birth to fire, it can become fire, and it also contains fire. So that's when we're talking about the light energy that is in water. And water actually is basically liquid light. So for every 1 part matter inside of water, that would be the hydrogen and the oxygen, but you can barely even consider matter because they're both gases. I mean, it's really a miracle that these two gases can come together and create something, solidified or something tangible anyways. But that's the 1 part matter, hydrogen and oxygen. A trillion parts photons. There are trillion parts photons to 1 part matter in every single molecule of water, every molecule. So she's basically liquid light, contains the fire element, and then the same is true of the earth element as well. So before there was Pangea, which was the first land mass on Earth, there was Panthalassa, which was this giant super ocean. The entire world was just one big ocean of water. We have to understand that in order to love the planet, we need to understand her in her context of her history. And she is a water planet more than anything else. That's where she came from. Eventually, land masses arose from Panthalassa, but it came from the water. So the land comes from the water, and then water also contains the earth element as well, like we talked about with the minerals and electrolytes, which is enormously important to water's health, just as to our health. And then water also, let's see, she gives birth to the, I'm losing my train of thought. She gives birth to the land, she contains the land, and she can take the form of every element as well. So she takes the form of the earth when she condenses into ice. And then she takes the form of air when she becomes a water vapor. Also, air comes from water because this giant ocean, Panthalassa, created our atmosphere. There was no oxygen in the atmosphere at first. It came from the water. And even now, we give trees a lot of credit for creating our oxygen, but around 80% of our oxygen actually comes from the ocean. So she gives rise to the air, and she takes the form of air, and she contains air because she needs aeration. She needs to exchange gases like oxygen and carbonic acid. In fact, Dr. Tom Cowan said that he believed that one day science would discover that the dissolved gases inside of water are just important as the water itself. And that would be, stabilized oxygenated water like O4 water, for example, or even molecular hydrogen rich water to get those gases, to get that breath in there. So she really, all of the elements, she's the mother of all of them.
I've never heard anyone speak into that so eloquently and so beautifully. I'm pretty sure that very few, if anyone that's watching this would have heard that information. I think it's just so important. And the more I hear you talk, the more it really confirms all of the things that I've been feeling and thinking and kind of believing around water and spirit. And that actually, someone once said to me, oh, what if um, water, its consciousness, is what is filling us, and every living thing expressing its consciousness through us so that it can observe us from every specific way. So it's kind of like it fills us, it is this conscious expression of itself, but it's also looking at itself through these mirrors of our eyes. And it's a really interesting theory, idea. And but the more I hear, there's this and I'm sure I know you actually recreated it. There was this thing on Instagram where this guy is saying, or this lady says, what if water is God? And then this guy goes into this thing about, well, that would mean that it would be inside of us and outside of us, above us and below us. There would be no life without it. It could give life and take it away. All of these different things. And it goes into a bunch of other stuff about holy water. And that would mean that all lakes and rivers and streams and bodies of water were holy. And goes into some other really interesting things
And
about.
when it rains, you would be in a cathedral. I love that part.
I love that too. Just a really interesting take on and look on it. But when you start really diving deep, these are the areas I believe that water takes you. You can't not go to them because
Absolutely.
they're also logical. It's not some crazy woo-woo out there kind of a thing. It's actually makes sense. It's the only thing I found that actually I can apply to some of the biggest questions that we've asked over, all of this time of being humans, and questioned about the meaning of life and what happens after we die and all of these different kinds of things. How do we know that there is a spirit? How do we experience all of these things? What is consciousness? Like it's a one-stop kind of place where if you apply water to these questions, it actually gives you an answer that makes sense. It's the only thing I found.
Same here. Same here. And I've looked so deeply into it. I mean, everywhere I look, I just see it over and over again that water is the place where spirit and science meet. And the more we dive into the science of water, the more it points us towards spirituality and theology. And the more I look at spirituality and theology and look at all of the scriptures of all of the various religions around the world and look at all of the creation stories of all of the indigenous people around the world and look at all of their practices and their customs and their rituals and their ceremonies and their holy water practices, they all lead back to the same things that we're discovering about the science of water. I created 3 workbooks for people if anybody's interested in diving more into the indigenous perspectives. I have a workbook called Mythos and Creation. And if you're interested in the scriptural teachings, I have one that's called Water and Scripture. And then if you're interested in more in the scientific spiritual, I have one called Water and the Quantum Ether. But I'm actually thinking about hosting an entire kind of masterclass series coming up in November that just goes really deeply into all of this because there's more being discovered all the time. And what I hear a lot from people is, oh, well, water couldn't be God because God is everywhere all throughout the universe. And well, so is water, and God I think of as being like the hologram of consciousness. The more we learn about water, the more we're seeing that water actually is a hologram that holds the maps of reality, of every layer and level of reality cross-dimensionally. And you see these watersheds nested within watersheds at every level of existence from, every cell in your body is 70% water. Your body as a whole is 70% water. The earth itself is 70% water. 70% of the condensed matter in our outer solar system is water. 70% of the universe is hydrogen. And then to kind of look at it from a different perspective, Each water molecule, about 70% of that is hydrogen. And if you look at the universe as a whole, 70% of the universe is dark matter. And then another, 24-ish percent is dark energy. Well, there's a new theory in physics and cosmology called dark fluid theory, which says that dark matter and dark energy are actually the same unified field because they behave like water. They're calling it dark fluid theory, that it's actually this giant cosmic ocean of invisible energy influencing everything from the cosmic to the subatomic. And there's actually several researchers now who say that they believe, excuse me, that dark matter and dark energy are actually forms of hydrogen. So even the mainstream physicists right now are using hydrogen emissions in space to measure time and to measure dark matter and dark energy. But dark matter and dark energy can't be directly perceived themselves. That's why they're called dark, not because they're actually dark, but because they're unseen. Just like God and consciousness is unseen and yet moves through everything and influences everything. But there are certain forms of hydrogen in its S state and in its ionic state in which it couldn't be perceived, but it could be shifting states and giving off these hydrogen emissions, which is what they're measuring to determine, the flow of time and where the dark matter is and that sort of thing. So if you believe that theory, which I do because it just makes so much sense in all the research that I've done, then we could say that the very foundation of water itself is also the foundation of the entire universe. Hydrogen itself in Latin literally means hydro, water, and gen, creator. So the creator of water, hydrogen, is the very fabric of our entire universe, and it acts in this fluid way, which is why they're calling it dark fluid theory. I mean, if you look at, for example, the Christian mythology, what they thought was the most important thing to say, first and foremost, before anything else in Genesis, was in the beginning there was nothing, and then God moved over the face of the water. So before anything else had been created, there was God and water, and that water had a face. That water was not inanimate. That water was a being with a face. And I find it really interesting that it also says that we were created in God's image. But when we look into the face of water, we see our own image. Water is mentioned in the Bible more than 700 times. It's mentioned more than love. It's mentioned more than worship. It's mentioned more than anything else that Christianity has been ostensibly built around. It's in the first lines of Genesis and the last lines of Revelations. And I've done similar studies with the Vedic texts as well, where they say that all beings are made of water, all deities are made of water, all of the worlds are made of water. It's fascinating that she's right here communicating with us all the time, just as God would be. And that the more we recognize how prayer and intention and manifestation and the biology of belief and the law of attraction and all of these things, the mechanism by which they actually work is because your body water is a superconductor that actually conducts that energy when it is a coherent and focused energy, like a prayer or an intention is coherent and focused. It brings the coherence of your body water molecules into that sacred geometry state, and then that conducts energy through it like a laser, like a very focused laser. So another amazing thing about hydrogen that I definitely want to touch on while we're talking about it and some of its mysterious properties is, so we were saying before that hydrogen is a proton and an electron, right? Well, that electron is very unstable. It's always dancing around. It will flip between this hydrogen and that hydrogen. It will sometimes disappear completely in and out of existence. We can never simultaneously know the location and the direction of an electron at the same time. They're just wily little critters, right? So whenever it flits away from the hydrogen, you're left with just a bare proton. And the best understanding that physicists currently have, this comes from Nassim Haramein and a few others, around what is a proton, actually what is the nature of a proton, is that a proton is actually a black hole. that it is a 64 tetrahedron black hole. And so within yourself all the time and within water all of the time are these black holes that are constantly opening up, even if it's just for a picosecond, even if it's for a split nanosecond of a picosecond. I mean, this happens so quickly. But nevertheless, in some instantaneous present moment, you're opening up countless black holes through which all information, all times, all spaces, and all dimensions are accessible.
I mean, that's kind of a mic drop moment. Because I think, honestly, what you've just covered, I am going to be replaying and watching myself and really allowing all of that to absorb, because you've put it into terms that people can actually comprehend. It's really hard to kind of go through the science garb sometimes and try to figure out, okay, what do they actually mean here? But you've just put that all together in such an incredibly profound way. And, you know, I think that you may have changed a few lives here with this conversation in a really profound way. I really want to honor this journey that you've taken, in that the way you are able to communicate with people, it's so difficult. Some people have all this wisdom within them, but it's really hard to be a teacher and actually share it in a way that people can understand. So I do really want to honor you for that, because you've taken us on an incredible journey with this, with water, with your love for water has taken you on this journey of deep discovery. And like you've said, and I find myself, it's like this constant discovery. I always feel like I'm just like this baby, just like I just don't know anything, but I'm just slowly learning. I do have.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. I so receive that. Thank you for that reflection. But I just have to give all the credit to water. Like I don't even take credit for it. Before I ever come on a podcast or an interview or something, I always like have a moment to just pray with the water and be like, just be my voice. Just speak through me. And sometimes the inspirations they come through research, but a lot of times like the idea will come through spending time with water and communing with water, being in a body of water, or practicing Janzu or something like that, which is one of my favorite ways to communicate with water. And then something will come through, and then I'll go research it, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like it's really just an interesting process of listening, and that's available to every single person. And to me, for me, it comes through in a scientific way because that's just like I geek out on it. But for every single person, no matter what your passion is, no matter what spirit has called you to do in your life, there's a way to bring water to that. There is a way to serve water through that. I think one of the most one of her biggest calls to us right now is that it's time to serve water in whatever way you can. Water needs you. If you are a lawyer, take on a pro bono case for some like eco water project. If you're a writer, please write and let people know about some of the water injustices and how we can decolonize water in this world. If you are, no matter what your calling is, there's a way to serve water through that. And as you start developing this relationship through Veda's incredible practices, like please let her guide you, because if really she is the glove on the hand of consciousness, as your friend Mose Hackman says, I just love that, then spirit is calling you to do something for the water, because water doesn't need us to protect her, but we are water protecting herself. So I just want to throw that in there as kind of an aside, that our love for water can't just stop at like our own, personal hydration, but really the whole planet needs to be hydrated right now.
I have a friend in the UK. He's got a business called Fine Liquids. He's all about getting people to understand about different types of water and to try and to understand the subtleties of differences in taste and these kinds of things. And he has this lovely slogan, which is hydrate the mind. And I think that's really lovely when we think about hydration in other ways other than the ones we know. We can definitely hydrate the mind and hydrate the body. And if we have like I guess one of the questions, there's people on here that are really interested in health and healing. And I know a lot of people say, look, I only have filtered water, it's all I can afford, or I've got reverse osmosis, that's what we have in the house. Like, and they can't afford to do a lot of other things. Like, is there anything you could suggest that those people might be able to do? Because not everybody can afford to, get these extra things. And so, it would be helpful for people. What is something that they could do that isn't going to cost a lot of money? Is there anything you can recommend?
Yeah, definitely. So thankfully, actually, the highest quality water in the world is free. Try to find your local spring. It's a pilgrimage to go to a local spring. It's like going to the source, and it's free and accessible and open source for everyone. So there's a website called findaspring.com that you can use to find your local springs, and it's a user-supported website. So if you know of a spring that is not yet on there, please add it. If you don't find a local spring on there, you can also check the Geological Survey. In the US, it's the US Geological Survey. I don't know what it is in different countries, but find your local Geological Survey. Get in touch with your local watershed association. They will have your local your local watershed mapped pretty well. Um, you can also go on an app called Gaia GPS, which is actually created for hikers, but there are a lot of springs mapped on there as well. And talk to the folks of older generations in your community. If none of those other methods work, just old fashioned, right? Like it boggles my mind sometimes that we are really actually only one or two generations separated from spring water harvesting being the de facto regular practice. And then, for 200,000 years of human evolution, all the way up until two, 3 generations ago, it's just been that's what human beings do. We drink spring water. And so the older people in your community might have even grown up doing that. So they may know where some springs are. Sometimes they'll be on private property, but more often than not, if you speak to the owners of the land, they're happy to let you harvest, and they might even be excited to find that they have a treasure on their property as well. If you find a spring that is not very accessible in terms of actually harvesting water from it, there are practices that you can use or people that you can hire who are well versed in these practices to actually tap the spring. And you can go to a site called Water Stories. I think it's waterstories.com or We Are Water Stories on Instagram. All of their watershed restoration courses are top notch. Highly recommend them. I mean, they teach ways to basically bring barren, dry, arid deserts back to being uh, wet, green areas just by enticing water to come and make its home there. And they also teach how you can tap a spring as well.
If people can't, for some reason, if they live in the middle of a desert and they're far, far away from a spring, is there anything they can do at home?
Yes, definitely. So this is what I teach in the Navigating the Waters e-course, the filter, structure, balance, and energize. And there are at-home versions of all of this. So you can even build an at-home DIY filter using various strata of, sand and rocks and different things. It's not going to be enormously effective, but it's totally doable, and it's a really fun thing to do with kids. Actually, as kind of a project, you can like build it inside of a plastic bottle and kind of see how hydrology works. And then for structure, there are a lot of things that you can do. You can actually build your own flow form using marbles. I mean, one of the things that you've shown really beautifully is that even holding your water up to your heartbeat for a little while and just connecting with the water, that's one of the most profound things that we can do to help to structure it. Another thing that people can do is to make sure that water isn't being actively destructured. So just make sure that you don't keep your water near your Wi-Fi router or near any strong EMFs that will destructure it. In some cases, like if you're dealing with tap water, a lot of the compounds that are in tap water are actually volatile compounds. So some of them will actually off gas over time if you just allow the water to sit out for a while. Like if you know you have a lot of chlorine, chloramine is a little bit harder, but usually chlorine will off gas pretty much overnight if you leave it sitting out. anytime you bring more movement to water, she's going to be happier. So I'm not going to say that if you just swirl with a spoon, it's going to get structured, because, studies have shown that like it takes a lot of time and a lot of elbow grease. Even if you're stirring for a whole hour, there's not a whole lot of change. But it's something. And you can leave your water in the moonlight. Water loves moonlight. Yeah, there are different practices that you can do in terms of structuring, in terms of balance. So balance includes mineralization and aeration, making sure that your water is eating and breathing. So with the mineralization, just getting a really high quality sea salt or rock salt or lava salt. And you can actually create a Soleil solution at home, which is a really highly saturated water and salt solution. It has pretty magical properties. And there's a book called Water and Salts, The Essence of Life, that you can find at the bookstore at waterislife.shop, and learn more about that magic. But you can do that easily at home, and then you mineralize your water that way. To aerate your water, there was actually an indigenous culture that would actually, I forget where it was, but they would gurgle their water every time before they drank it, just to give it a little bit more aeration and to get the sound of their voice into it, like, So you can do that with different tones. So that's filter, structure, balance. And then for the energize, that's basically just kind of teaching your water, or patterning it with whatever. It's going to become a vessel of whatever it's exposed to. So if it's exposed to a certain kind of music, it's going to turn that music into liquid form and fill your cells with that, basically. And that is an oversimplification, because of course it does lose a lot of that resonance as it goes through your body, because the resonance of your own emotional state is much stronger than the patterning in the water. But to oversimplify things in that way, it's a really fun way to work with water. So there's a lot that you can do. Mostly it's your intention and your relationship that matters the most.
Absolutely. Actually, going back to something you said about learning how, like, just like moving the water within you. I remember reading, it was a long time ago now, but about these, I think they were Tibetan monks, and they would do this thing, which was to actually, they put it down to this particular movement being one of the reasons they could live such a long life. And that was turning, like basically putting their arms out and turning around like the dervish, like people that do the dance thing. And they would swirl one way and then swirl the other way, several times one way and several times the other way.
21 times.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the 5 Tibetan rites. You do them for years. I used to do them every morning, and you start off with the 21 twirls, and then you do these 4 other little exercises. That's really fun.
But I think
Again, water has, good.
it's like you're vortexing the water inside of you, and that by doing that. So it's actually really interesting.
Totally, totally. I mean, your inner waters are constantly vortexing anyways. It's the only thing that keeps you alive. Like your blood doesn't just flow through your veins. Your veins actually have spiral striations on the inside of them that allows the blood to spiral through. Otherwise, it would stagnate and lose its structure. Your heart, we think of it as being like this 4 chambers, wrapped up like this, but actually it's a muscle that, if you unravel it, is one really long muscle that is just spiraled in on itself. It's just curled in, it's one long thing, but it acts as a vortex. It doesn't, your heart as a muscle isn't strong enough to pump your blood through your body, but rather acts as a vortex that gives it that initial energy and impetus to then spiral through your veins, and your cerebral spinal fluid as well. It doesn't just flow up and down your spinal column, it spirals. In fact, the word in German for spinal column is spiral column, and the word for vertebrae is vortices. All through your body, you constantly have spirals. In fact, the next time you pee, if you get brave, look down at your urethra and notice that even your pee comes out in a spiral.
That's so true. I love that. And I think that I think because it's so fun to be able to have little things we can also do ourselves in the privacy of our own home, whether we are swirling around. And it's why movement is also so important. Rather than being sort of stagnant, it's just the same. Water loves to move and move, excuse me, not going around like a lot of right angles and all these kinds of things through
Mm.
piping, but kind of meanders around and has this kind of beautiful sensual way of moving. And so that's why I think it's interesting also that Dr. Sharad Paul, who I'm also will be part of this whole package, and I'm re-interviewing him tomorrow. And well, he was saying that one of the best things to prevent Alzheimer's is to learn the tango, because it is such a moving. You're moving your head and your body, and it's all it's very interactive as well. And so just these kinds of things, whereas dance, in a lot of indigenous cultures, are ways in which they can get into various different states. There's so much there. But then when you apply water and the water within us, I mean, like doing the swirling, you're right, of course, water is always vortexing through the body, but there is an energetic movement, an energetic vortex that you're also creating in the air around us, which brings it in and out. And it's just like amazing. And some
Mm.
people might be going, I'm not really a dancer, but you don't, there's stuff you can do that nobody's ever gonna see.
Totally, totally. I actually went to Thailand and studied dervish whirling for this exact reason. I was like so obsessed with water. I was like, I'm gonna become the vortex.
I love that about you. Oh my
But
god.
it's so true. Water has all of the same needs that we have. Water needs to move like we need to move, and for the exact same reasons. Because when water stagnates inside of our body, we get stagnation of qi, and that is in Eastern medicine, it's the root of all disease and dysfunction. It's the stagnation of qi, and we know that because water is the conductor of qi in our body, stagnation of qi is the result of stagnation of body water. And so, unlike the circulatory system, where we have this amazing heart that will vortex blood for us, a lot of the other hydrological systems in our body are actually hydraulic networks, and hydraulic means movement by water. In other words, they don't move on their own; they move when we move. So, for example, your lymphatic, your fascia. So your fascia is actually an irrigation network. That's its primary function. It's 80% water and 20% protein, and it delivers these beautiful drops of water to each and every cell along these highly structured webs and networks of structured water. And it's just beautiful to witness under a microscope, because you can actually see the little water droplets moving along what look like these crystalline spider webs. It's gorgeous. And your fascia can only deliver that hydration into your cells when it's moving. So it moves through like compression and release. And so, especially for some of the harder to hydrate areas, like the areas that we might not move quite as often, like your little toe that is stuck in shoes most of the time, or these areas, they tend to get stagnation of body water, so they tend to just not be very well hydrated. So this is another reason why, like, just drinking water will irrigate you, but hydration is more lifestyle practices like movement. And it doesn't have to be like, you know, intense physical exercise. Even a small movement to you is actually a really big movement to your cells. So just making sure you're moving each toe. And really, when it comes to hydrating your fascia, it's about as many diverse, novel movements of as many parts of your body as you can, whether that's just a simple stretch or a simple movement while you're sitting and working. To just move a little bit will keep your body from stagnating. And then your lymphatic fluid as well. So hydration isn't just a matter of the water, the nourishing water that you're taking into your cells. It's also a matter of making sure that the detoxifying water can also flow out of your cells and then be processed and detoxified through your lymphatic fluid. You actually have 3 times more lymph than you have blood in your body. So we are far more lymph than blood. And it's another network that only moves when we move. But thankfully, we have all of these amazing lymphatic ducts right at our joints. So just making sure that you move each joint in novel ways every day, or as often as you can. It doesn't have to be hard exercise. It can be a fun game. Oh, have I moved this joint yet today? Have I moved that joint yet today? Have I not even thought of this joint in the past 6 months? Um, It can be a really fun practice. Actually, I have a whole e-course called Internal Oceans. It's my biggest and most comprehensive course that goes into every single watershed of your body and how to care for it and how it exactly mirrors the hydrology of Mother Earth. So we have all of the same hydrology within ourselves that Mother Earth has, and the way that we care for the Earth's watersheds is the same as we care for our internal watershed. So if you're really interested in like the biology of your bio water, then I recommend
I'm going to be signing up to all your courses at this point.
that.
I think it's just so wonderful, even though, there's always more to learn. And sometimes you learn it, you might have heard it, but when you hear it from someone, it just kind of the penny drops and you go, oh, right, I totally get that now. And I think part of wellness is actually really understanding the well within you and how to
Mhm.
move that water from that well. So,
I love that.
thank
That's so beautifully expressed.
you. So, I mean, you and I know we could talk for another 4 hours or something like that, or maybe days and days and days, because we're so much on the same page when it comes to this this beautiful life force, which is water. So I've covered all of the questions, really, and more, but I love this quote from Dr. Carly Nouday, who wrote a book called Water Codes. And I wrote a little bit in that book, which is all about the synergy of salt and water, because I also have a passion for salt. Um, and her quote says, if we are made, and you would know this, if we are made of diamonds, or at least the H2O equivalent, it becomes ludicrous to approach the body and our health as if it's a system made of graphite or coal.
Mhm.
And I think that we've been sort of doing that in regards to water. And one quick question I do have, it's just a practical question, where you were talking about Find a Spring and going to springs. Now, there was a big scare in the news in America a few years ago. It was really sad because a friend of mine was involved in that. They were talking about raw water and how you can't just drink raw water anymore, and you can't, there are specifics around that. Springs are different than just going to a stream or a river. There is a whole different thing there. So I don't want people to be confused around that. I have a friend, Seth, who had a company, I think, I don't know if he's still working with it or not, called Tourmaline Spring. And that was a beautiful spring. It was completely, clear and clean and gorgeous and consciously bottled and all these different kinds of things. Like Seth was like so passionate. He's so passionate about water and people understanding water in a more conscious way. But they were saying, oh, you're selling raw water. Well, he was perfectly able to, and he was able to prove why. It was completely clean of any pollutants. It came from a deep, deep underwater aquifer bubbling up in this beautiful, it was housed in this lovely little kind of little home for it where it was coming up and where they were actually bottling it. And so there can be confusion around this with people, because we've been fed so much fear about what's safe and what's not safe, and how, yes, our ancestors would go and collect wild water, but now we have all these pollutants in the air and this and this and that. But I think this is where springs are so special. And if you could just talk into that really quickly, and then I think we might just wrap it up from there.
For sure. Yeah, springs are absolutely some of the most holy, sacred places in the world, and I would invite people to not be daunted to go harvest spring water, because I know people who have been harvesting for decades, never had the water tested, gone to multiple springs around the world. I'm one of them. I've been drinking almost exclusively raw wild spring water since 2009. I've gone to many springs around the world. I honestly have never had them tested. I think I had one tested, and always been completely fine with, it's pure life energy being birthed. But if you have a reason to be concerned about your local spring, if you know that there is fracking in the area, for example, and there's a site, I think it might have gotten taken down, unfortunately, but it might still be up, called fracktracker.org or .com, where you can see where fracking sites are. Hopefully it's still there, to see if there's any fracking in your area, or if the spring is near like a cow field or something, or if it's generally lower in elevation, or if you're just hesitant and you just want to get it tested just for your own edification, have a lot of tests available on waterislife.shop. If you go to the forage category, there are some tests that you can do yourself, like TDS meters, hydrogen meters, things like that. And then there's one that you can send a sample in and then have it officially tested. I mean, I have all kinds of tests on there, but there's one specifically for spring water as well. So if that's a concern for you, then you can absolutely get it tested. But it is so vibrant, and there is nothing like it.
No, I am with you, but it's really nice for people that are concerned, because I still have people saying, well, do you filter your spring water? And it's already been filtered through the geology of the earth. So,
Mm-hmm.
but the deeper the aquifer, I have found that the more just you don't have to, like, I'm just trying to address people's issues. Like, I do hear that, and I think that there is this that people just not quite aware that there has been such a filtration process to go through the earth to go in to become this aquifer to then spring up and bubble up. I think springs are like, for me, that is the water that I love the most. And you feel it, it tastes different. You kind of, it has an energy that when it enters you, you just feel more alive. There is something so, so sacred and special, exactly what you're saying. But for those people that are, cautious or worried, then, Isabel's given you some options there. And I think it's always lovely to have options for everybody. And but I think that it's just real. It is important um, to understand that spring water is very different than stream water or river water, which is like open to the elements, whereas
Mm-hmm.
spring water is deep down in Mother Earth. It's a very different situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very, very well filtered by the earth on the way up. In fact, the filtration that happens through all of these layers of geology in the earth is far better than anything you would get from like a little carbon block filter in like a Brita or something like that. Like the earth has carbon in it. That's why we use carbon block filters. It already has gone through carbon filtration. It also gets filtered through clay, and we know that clay is healing and detoxifying. That's why we put it on our face to do cleansing masks, or geopatry can be a very cleansing practice if you're doing a detox or something like that. And then, it goes through the layers of the soil's, roots and microbes. And those microbes, if there's good, ecology in the area, which around springs, there pretty much always is, like really healthy flora and fauna and microbiology, then the water is not only clean, but it also doubles as nature's probiotic supplement. It has beneficial bacteria that you desperately need, that our bodies have evolved to be drinking this beneficial bacteria that keeps the water clean, and it also keeps your body in good balance. And that's another thing that we can't really recreate that, even if we go through all of these, steps of filter structure balance plus. I only know of one product that will actually restore a healthy, beneficial microbiome back to water. It's called Kelby, Qelby. It's on the shop as well. But usually that's something that a step that we just kind of overlook, and that's something that really is only found in spring water. Part of what gives it its vitality is that it's full of these organisms. And again, we have to stop thinking of things in isolation, like water is just H2O or I am just human. Actually, you have 1.3 other organisms in your body for every one cell of your own. You are more other organisms than you are yourself, and your health, not only your physical health, but your mental and emotional health, are almost entirely dependent on the diversity of your microbiome. And we're experiencing like a genocide level depletion of our soil microbiomes and our gut microbiomes, and water's microbiome has been completely overlooked in that conversation. And to restore that, we have to go back to spring. So when you do that, because there are microfauna and microflora in the water, occasionally when you harvest spring water, if you leave it in the sunlight, it will start to photosynthesize and bloom a little bit. So just one of the considerations when you harvest spring water is to try to keep it in a cool, dark place or just drink it sooner rather than later. But if you see a little bit of green, it's not something to be concerned about.
It's interesting you bring that up, because when I had that healing experience with the spring water for me, where all the glass was purged out of my body, I worked with that water a lot. And one of the things that I did was I put some of the water into a glass container, and it was in the sunlight for, I don't know, I left it out there for a few weeks because I wanted to actually test what grew. And so it was interesting. It started to grow this kind of slightly green brown algae. And when I got that tested, it was a really rare type of spirulina.
Mm.
So it's really, really interesting when you actually go and test what is growing there. And it actually, then you see, wow, that's incredible. That's amazing.
Mhm.
So you're absolutely right. It's so interesting. Um, so I mean, I feel like I could just continue on and
I
on.
know, me too. We're gonna have to do this again and chat more sometime. This is just
Oh,
so fun talking to you.
oh, I appreciate that, and likewise. So, how do people find you? I mean, I'm sure everyone will be rushing over to your site to sign up for your classes, but you also have like such a huge array of different things that people can get from you. Can you just remind us where to go to?
Mhm, for sure. So the shop is waterislife.shop. And if you have no idea where to start, I also do one-on-one consultations for people to develop a personalized hydration strategy that'll fit for your budget and your lifestyle and your needs and your source water. And you can book that at waterislife.teachable.com. Also at that website, I have webinars, I have workbooks, I have e-courses. The main one to start with for water quality is called Navigating the Waters, and then the one for your internal bio waters is called Internal Oceans. There's also a couple of free webinars on there, so that's a pretty comprehensive resource. And then waterislife.love is my main website with tons of free blogs and videos and some PDF downloads and guided meditations and that kind of thing. But I'm most active on Instagram, where I post pretty much every day, and that's my name at Jen Isabel Friend.
Perfect. Thank you. And although I realize there's one more question about fasting, but it seems almost silly now because I think the answer is so obvious, where I would say to you, what kind of water would you recommend people do a water fast with? And I think we've already covered that, but if
Full
you,
spectrum, coherent, raw, wild, living, mineral rich, deuterium depleted, hydrogen enriched water, if you can. Just get a spring aqua, it'll take care of it.
all right. Thank you so much. I'm so excited for people to watch this. I really appreciate you and your time and your love for water.
Thank you so much for having me on. It has been such an honor to come on and to get to know you. And I've been following your work for so long and just admiring you and supporting you and being inspired by you from a distance. So I'm really, really overjoyed to come chat with you today. And thanks so much to everyone who watched.
Thank you.